Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a massive, frankly eye-opening report from the Geopolitical Economy Report. They're arguing that the US-Iran conflict has basically hit a critical tipping point. So we're going to follow their data trail today to figure out why Washington might just be staring down a multi-front crisis with, well, no easy way out.
Okay, the whole analysis really anchors on this one wild admission that got leaked to NBC News. A U.S. government official literally said the administration is facing strategic defeat without clear policy guidance or a decision about where this is going. I mean, wow. According to the report's authors, this leak is the smoking gun. It shows Washington is basically trapped in an unwinnable situation, scrambling for an exit strategy while trying to save face.
To understand how things allegedly got this far off the rails, the report breaks down 3 compounding crises. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with a war out of control, then look at the missile shortage, move into rising military casualties, followed by an expanding energy crisis, and finally, the strategic defeat assessment.
Let's jump right into Section 1, a war out of control, and specifically, the failed ceasefire.
The report argues the strategy here has been, to put it mildly, deeply disorganized. The sequence of events is pretty telling. Things kick off with what they describe as unprovoked attacks on February 28, 2026. Fast forward to mid-June, and initial peace talks are allegedly sabotaged. Then comes a big pivot. A so-called pause for negotiations is announced on July 25th. But airstrikes resumed just 4 days later on July 29th. The authors argue this kind of severe whiplash points to a total lack of a cohesive game plan.
Moving right along to Section 2, the missile shortage and the depleting arsenal.
The very first major material crisis they point to is a massive depletion of U.S. air defense munitions. Wall Street Journal analysts estimate the military started this conflict with roughly 2,500 Patriot interceptors. But get this, in just a matter of months, they've burned through an estimated 1,500 of them. That's 60% of their critical defensive inventory gone. Poof. Just trying to fend off retaliatory strikes, leaving a measly 1,000 left in the entire stockpile.
And guys, the financial toll attached to that is staggering. According to the New York Times, each one of those Patriot missiles costs up to $5 million. So do the math on 1,500 fired interceptors. That's $6 billion literally evaporated on Patriot missiles alone. And remember, that doesn't even touch the day-to-day operational costs of the wider war. So you're probably wondering, can't they just, build more?
Well, the report points out a massive production bottleneck at the defense contractor Raytheon. Despite basically bottomless funding, Raytheon can only manufacture about 600 of these advanced PAC-3 interceptors a year. If the military is burning through 1,500 in just a few months, they are mathematically incapable of keeping up.
Because the math simply doesn't favor Washington, the military is reportedly being pushed to some extraordinary lengths. We're talking reports of the Pentagon having to place domestic orders for 30-year-old legacy Patriot models. The shortage is reportedly so bad that the U.S. actually had to request emergency supplies from NATO allies, with Poland being the only country that could even step in to help.
Now, the analysis also takes aim at media narratives claiming the U.S. is intentionally holding back, saving its best weapons for a potential conflict with China. Reviewing the industrial data, the authors call this idea mathematically absurd. Think about it. If the U.S. weapons inventory is currently struggling just to sustain a regional conflict in the Middle East, there is simply no way it can outproduce China's vastly superior industrial capacity in things like steel, electricity, and heavy manufacturing.
All right, Section 3, rising military casualties and a very controversial toll.
To build the case that the U.S. is desperately looking for an off-ramp, the report highlights some pretty explosive allegations about a Pentagon cover-up regarding human casualties. They actually point to Leon Panetta, the former U.S. Defense Secretary and CIA director. He told The Guardian the Pentagon is taking a shameful approach, saying flat out there's a deliberate effort here to basically withhold information from the American people. The authors argue this secrecy is completely driven by the fear of massive public backlash before the upcoming November midterms.
Just look at this alleged accounting maneuver. Initially, the New York Times reported 18 U.S. soldiers killed in action. But then, the Pentagon revised that number down to 14. Their justification? They actually subtracted 4 casualties because those specific deaths technically happened after a ceasefire had been declared. The source flags this as a blatant example of cooking the books just to minimize the perceived human cost of the war.
And it's not just tragic deaths. The report asserts that hundreds of military injuries are being deliberately kept quiet. According to their data, the Pentagon has completely stopped holding regular press briefings, sometimes for months at a time. This basically ensures that the true number of wounded personnel, which is estimated to be well into the hundreds, stays safely out of the domestic political conversation.
Let's transition to Section 4, an expanding energy crisis and its massive global ripple effect.
So how does this regional conflict spiral into a global domino effect? The source maps it out perfectly in 3 steps. Step 1. Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, literally the world's most vital oil transit choke point. Step 2. Saudi Arabia desperately tries to bypass that by redirecting its oil through pipelines to ports over on the Red Sea coast. But then, Step 3. Yemen enters the conflict in solidarity with Iran and slaps a strict maritime blockade on the Red Sea. Boom! In 3 moves, Saudi Arabia is completely boxed in, with their oil exports cut off from both sides.
To prove this isn't just some hypothetical theory, the source brings in hard data from Reuters. Satellite footage absolutely confirms massive shipping slowdowns. On top of that, Yemeni forces have reportedly pulled off successful targeted strikes on Saudi Aramco oil infrastructure in the port city of Yanbu. This is huge because the Saudi monarchy relies almost entirely on oil revenue to fund its country. Without it, they are looking at the immediate threat of severe internal political turmoil.
And here's where the crisis hits the global economy and, honestly, potentially your wallet. This blockade isn't just a Middle East problem. Close U.S. allies in Asia, specifically Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, and Thailand, rely on the Middle East for up to 90% of their oil. Because of this conflict, these nations are facing severe shortages right now. And the skyrocketing cost of energy is sending massive waves of inflation through the entire global market. Just to hammer home how immediate this threat is, the report points to a really stark warning from a Guardian analyst. They warned that we are, quote, scraping at the bottom of the barrel in terms of global reserve capacity. There is very little inventory now. The authors argue this isn't some distant future worry. It is a severe, current reality that is causing absolute panic in Washington.
Highlighting the sheer gravity of this, the source reminds us of a frankly shocking admission made by the U.S. president back in June. He reportedly stated that there were only 4 weeks of oil left in international reserves. Just let that sink in. 4 weeks. It's a terrifying metric that the geopolitical economy report uses to explain exactly why the administration is so desperate to find a way out of this conflict.
Which brings us to our final section, the strategic defeat assessment and our key takeaways.
When you synthesize the missile shortages, the hidden casualties, and this global oil blockade, the source comes to one very definitive conclusion. The United States has bitten off way more than it can chew. They impartially assert that the U.S. military has effectively lost the conflict and just lacks the material capacity to win it. Because of this, they argue that Iran now holds all the diplomatic leverage, and the only viable way to prevent further global economic collapse is a peace agreement where Washington makes some very significant concessions to Tehran.
So, based on the logistical, economic, and political evidence presented by the Geopolitical Economy Report today, we want to leave you with this final thought. If the math on missile production and global oil reserves is truly as dire as the source claims, can the U.S. actually find a face-saving diplomatic off-ramp? Or is an escalating, unwinnable regional quagmire now totally inevitable? It's a deeply complex question that will undoubtedly shape our global landscape. Thanks so much for exploring this explainer with us today, and we'll see you next time.